Okay, hi everybody. Today we have a fun one, and I think it's going to be a long one. I hope it's not too long, but there's a large number of slides. So let's see how this goes. This one is teaching Illuminism to Abrahamists. So what the hell? Everyone get in here now. So, of course, this is classic Illuminism, and all based upon the philosophical idealist treatise by Mike Hockney. So how could we teach Illuminism to Abrahamists? Is that a thing which is possible? As we've seen in recent videos, I think it's actually going to be harder to teach mathematics to scientists, to teach ontological mathematics and the idea that math is what's behind science to scientists of all people. I think that Abrahamists will actually pick up on this idea once it's explained to them quite a bit more easily. Anyway, let's sort of develop something here and see how this goes. It was really fun making this presentation. So, in general, religion falls under the idea of deism, which is Illuminism, and which is idealism, right? So what is this? So this is the concept that existence is a structure of mind. And so the best sort of exemplar of that is Descartes and his statement, "I think, therefore I am." Now, what did he mean by that? What he meant is that all that we know for certain is that we think. That's all that we know for certain. The only thing we are absolutely sure of is that we think. You know, it's funny because I was watching one of those Closer to Truth episodes, and the fellow, who's the host of that show? I'm sorry, whatever his name is, asked the scientist, "What do we know for sure?" And the scientist said, "Well, the only thing we know for sure is that there are particles." It's just like, they don't even know what the questions are, the scientists. They don't even know what the questions are and the questions mean. That's not what we know. We don't know that there are particles. You don't even know, first of all, you don't even know what a particle is made of and what it is made of in it itself. Secondly, you can't get to particles before you have a lot of other things first before that. Primarily, you have to be able to think about them. The only way that you know about particles is because you're thinking about them, because if you've done things to discover what you think is them, and you're thinking about them. So no way, particles isn't the only thing that we're sure of. The only thing that we're sure of comes way before particles, and it's that we're thinking. That's the only thing that we're sure of, is that we're thinking. That's the only thing you know. But yes, I mean, to a sensing type, to scientific materialists, the only thing they know is that they're touching or looking at something. Well, we did something and we saw particles, so we're definitely sure that there are particles. And it's like, well, what about what it took for you to perceive the particle? Doesn't that count? What about what it takes for you to perceive the particle, which is your mind, which is thought? That comes before the particle. So the only thing that you actually know is that you're thinking about a particle. And the particle might not be a particle. You're just interpreting it as a particle, aren't you? Right? Anyway, let's not get hung up on that because we got a lot to get through. All right, so all that we know for certain is that we think. This is the only bare brute fact, all perception. Everything is mediated by thought. Therefore, to avoid substance dualism, all things must be a form of thought, because how could you have things that are not thought interacting with thought, right? That was Descartes' position, right? What he explained, you know, this idea of substance dualism. How can you have separate substances? How would they interact? You have to have substances which are in some way the same thing so they can communicate with each other, right? So if the only thing that you're absolutely sure of is that you're thinking, then everything must be a form of thought so that it's all the same substance, so that it can interact, so that it can, well, yeah, just that, interact. So thought can create the idea of matter. So there's nothing wrong with that. We can certainly I mean, in your dreams create matter. Your dreams create perfectly real, vivid worlds that as you're dreaming, you totally believe are real. So that proves that your thought and your thoughts and mind can totally create the idea of matter. Alternatively, why the heck would matter think? That makes no sense at all. It's totally sensible that thought can create matter because you just invent it. You just think about it. We do it in our dreams. But why would matter invent thinking? That's the strangest thing of all. And of course, that's what scientists say. And you ask them, well, how do they do it? And they use this term. It's a very special term. You want to see it? Or do you want to hear it, I mean? This is how scientists pose it, that matter can just randomly start thinking for no reason. It's done by spontaneous complexity. It's their magic. It's their magic formula to get matter to do magical things that make no sense whatsoever. Anyway, why would matter think? Why would matter and rocks have the property of being able to think if you arrange them in a particular special way? I mean, what do you have to remove to stop it from thinking? What do you have to add to make it start thinking? It makes no sense, right? But certainly a mind can think and a mind can invent matter. So usually, typically universally, I suppose, religion or deism, idealism, typically human existence is relevant to the universe and vice versa. The universe is relevant to human existence. There's a connection there, some sort of underlying meaning or just, relationship, which is not arbitrary and not haphazard, but relevant in some sense or another. So in religious terms, we call this structure of existence God. Typically, it's thought of as being all-knowing. Whether it's omnipotent and all-powerful is sort of a concern or a question that philosophers have asked. That's, the myth of Sisyphus, I suppose, right? So, but there's no scientific evidence for it. What would scientific evidence even be? So how would you actually prove the existence of God? How would you prove that existence is a structure of mind? How would you prove that? Like, aside from the philosophical arguments, how would you actually prove it? What would evidence, scientific evidence, actually look like? We're going to get into that. So, as opposed to deism, Illuminism, and idealism, you have atheism or materialism or modern science. So the question here in science, and it's perfectly legitimate for them to state this, is that if existence is mind, mind means life. Excuse me. And a life means agency and will. But there's no evidence that such a process, such a being or such a property of existence is at work in the cosmos. Because if you consider the laws of physics, for example, Newton's second law, F equals ma, which is a simple equation, Kepler's third law, t squared equals a cubed, the period of a planet's orbit, squared is equal to its semi-major axis cubed. Ohm's law, voltage equals current times resistance. You have gravity, you have Coulomb's law, you have E equals mc squared, you have energy equals h nu for a photon. So the thing about these laws is that they all look dead. They're equations, and you might ask where the equations came from, but the thing about the equations is that they're just static. They're not doing anything. They govern a process or a behavior, and things in nature and existence follow these equations, given the appropriate context. But other than that, it's pretty dead looking. It doesn't really do much. It doesn't really act like life or mind, which is agency and the ability to change and do things, right? So where's the room for the agency of a God mind? So do the laws of physics require a God in the first place, or do they just exist, right? So in multiverse theory, in science, you have multiverse theory, you have random accident theory, where the laws just exist, or you can have an infinite number of universes, and in this universe, this is just the way that the laws turned out, and these laws allow for the universe to exist as we know it, with planets and stars. Another question comes in is, okay, well, sure, the laws are one thing, but then in the laws you have these constants. So the gravitational force constant, Coulomb's constant, the speed of light constant, and Planck's constant, and there's several others. And the thing about these constants is that, so just aside from the laws of physics existing, and you can't really explain, well, where would these laws of physics come from? Why do they exist in the first place? They have within them these constants, which themselves, you ask, why are they the values that they are? Because these values are actually extremely highly finely tuned to also allow the existence of things like planets and galaxies and solar systems. If these constants were different, then the universe wouldn't exist as we know it, and life wouldn't be possible as we know it. So the laws exist, but then in addition to the laws existing, you have the constants in the laws, which govern how the laws work, and those are very finely tuned. So the scientists, instead of saying, well, God did that, because there's still no evidence of God, and that would be too easy of an explanation. If you just say everything that's confusing, if you just say, oh, well, God did that, well, that doesn't actually lead you to any discovery, does it? Right? In any case, to explain that, so science comes up with multiverse theory, random accident theory, and that explains the fine-tuning problem, etc. And So yeah, and then given the vastness of the universe, the position in science then is to discount anthropocentrism and human emotion and any mythos placing humanity at the center of all, because it's obviously so big and so vast, how could we have any possible relevance to the universe? It would be the scientific position, the science position. So that's why they come up with multiverse theory, random accident theory, and such things. Great, so that's sort of the dichotomy you're facing. But in the end, I suppose that this talk was supposed to be targeted to an Abrahamist. This is just sort of explaining why science takes the position that it does. So the problem, if existence is a structure of mind, then other than rationalist or emotional arguments for it, for example, from philosophy, religion and God, etc., how would one go about scientific demonstration? What would scientific demonstration even be? Well, it would have to constitute a demonstration of the basic properties of mind, which is agency, and that's adaptation to changing circumstances. And of course, we don't see that in the laws of physics, because the laws of physics are just static. They don't change, they don't move, they don't act like they're alive. They're just these constant static structures that govern everything. And so you might say that God did that, but, you know, what's the evidence that God did that? And, you know, that's why scientists come up with multiverse theory. Okay, fine. So let's just repeat that, because this is important. So what would scientific demonstration be? So the problem is, if existence is mind, as deism would say, as Illuminism says, and, you know, traditionally as religion says, particularly Abrahamism. So if existence is a structure of mind, then how would you scientifically demonstrate that? What would constitute scientific demonstration of mind being the basis of existence? So of course the answer is that you have to demonstrate mind. And what is mind? What is the most basic property of mind? Basic property of mind is agency, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Okay, so where would you look for that exactly? Because in the laws of physics as we know them, you don't see that. So with that, then how do we do that? Where would we find that? How do you look? Where do you look? Right. So the idealist nature of existence, if existence is mind, all right, so here we're going to sort of bullet pointize basically the entire series of the God series and entire books. And some of these things might sound like, well, how did you form that conclusion? If you're familiar with the God series and idealism, you will understand these bullet points. If you're not, they might seem like they're just claims, but all of these bullet points are very, very well founded, and they are basically summaries of the entire work of Hockney and the writing group Hockney et al. So if existence is mind, mind must be made of a language, and naturally it is the language which describes itself because it is itself. It's one and the same thing. Mind is language, okay? So consciousness is a product of language. Human consciousness, for example, is a product of language, okay? But in general, you cannot have consciousness without language. So if you have language, then you have the potential for consciousness, okay? And existence is a language in and of itself. So existence as language is, so here's the question. Existence as language is then less conscious than itself, equally conscious to itself, or more conscious than itself? Well, the only possible rational answer to that, obviously, is that it's equally conscious to itself. Existence as mind, which has to be of language, which creates consciousness, is then equally conscious to itself or some other thing. Well, obviously, it can only be equally conscious to itself because it is itself, yes? Now, is existence being equally conscious to its own language as itself, minimally conscious or maximally conscious? It would be very odd to say that this is minimally conscious, right? Because it is itself. It's actually kind of odd to even say that it's maximally conscious. It's actually strictly just the definition, the only consciousness possible. It's probably better to call that maximally conscious. Probably makes more sense in the mind to call it maximally conscious. It doesn't make sense to call it minimally conscious. The only possibility is that it defines what consciousness is. And so that would be maximal possible consciousness, okay? So philosophically now, this proves the existence of all-knowing mind as existence. You can call it God, you can call it one. It's, you know, Hegel had this idea of, what was it, being, right? Yeah. So anyway, it's been demonstrated many times throughout history. Hegel is probably one of the best exemplars of demonstrating how this works. Um, and there's others too. In religion, obviously going back without having a philosophical rational argument, it's just sort of an emotional mythos argument. But basically there's consistency there and similarity there. The only thing which doesn't do this is modern science and materialism. Pretty much any other system somehow falls into this sort of strategy or categorization. Okay, yeah, oh yeah, and one other point is that this is not human consciousness. This is God consciousness. This is full consciousness. Human consciousness is not, you know, full maximal consciousness. Obviously, human consciousness is a new thing which is recently developed in evolutionary history. Good. So, what is then the language of existence? So, if existence is mind and mind is language, well, then what is that language? Would that language be love? That's, of course, what the love and lighters say, and that's, of course, what, you know, the religious Abrahamists would probably say. But the thing is, love is a perception, it's feeling, it's quite human, is it not? It's not actually quite a language. And actually, does it actually explain important fundamental aspects of the universe? As we were discussing in the last video, you know, a basic theory of existence should actually explain some basic things about science for us, right? So love doesn't actually explain any laws of physics or anything, does it? Or any of the mathematical relations that we know are at work in our reality, right? Should the language of existence be High German or Queen's English? Well, obviously those are totally arbitrary, right? So here it is. We saw this last time, but let's repeat it. This is from Galileo. Philosophy or nature is written in that great book which is ever before our eyes. I mean the universe, but we cannot understand it if we do not first learn the language and grasp the symbols in which it is written. The book is written in mathematical language, and the symbols are triangles, circles, and other geometrical figures, without whose help it is impossible to comprehend a single word of it, without which one wanders in vain throughout a dark labyrinth. Thanks, Galileo. So mathematics is existence's language. It's God's or one's language. It's all-knowing, it's universal, it's acting everywhere at once. And remember, this is simply to say that mathematics, ontological mathematics, is existence's language, simply because existence has to be rational. It has to be logical, because you have a choice. You want a rational existence or an irrational existence. If existence was based on irrationality, the planets wouldn't follow their paths around the sun. Your car wouldn't work from day to day. Your laptop or your computer would spontaneously transform into an elephant or something. You know what I mean? So existence is rational, has to be rational. And so that's simply to say that's mathematical, because mathematics is a language of rationality. It's really as simple as that. Yeah. So there must be a special form then. There must be a special form of mathematics, which is language's existence as mathematics. And that's what we call ontological mathematics. And we'll get into that a little bit more ahead. Great. So the strategy. For better or worse, by necessity or purpose, whatever functionality it, the language of existence, uses to create the universe, it keeps its nature hidden, at least to the human mind. Perhaps this wasn't always so, but mathematically, scientifically, it seems to be it's just by necessity. It's just how it works with ontological Fourier mathematics. Perhaps it's not too important of a point, but we will touch on it again ahead. But here's the important part. We have to find a scenario where it exposes itself. That's the key. So how would it do that? Because it's not doing it through the laws of physics as we currently know them in materialist science, right? So how would you find a scenario where the mind of existence exposes that it's doing something behind the scenes, right? So it would have to do it. Here's the answer, right? It would have to do it in math, in some physics scenario. And it would have to be demonstrated as some autonomous change to the math of the physics scenario, as an adaptation to some changed circumstance. So remember previously it was we need to be able to find evidence of mind. And how do you find evidence of mind? You have to find evidence of change, of autonomous change, of agency, right? And so the question is, where and how are you going to find that then scientifically? Well, it'll have to be in math, because if math is existence's language, then you're going to have to be able to find that sort of autonomy somehow in equations, in math. Not in the laws of physics as we know them, but in some other scenario, okay? So, ontological Fourier mathematics, this is where. So how does mental mathematical existence create our perceived reality? So base existence as a mental mathematical structure has no necessity of a space-time universe. It's unextended immaterial. It's a singularity of thought. So via ontological Fourier mathematics, an unextended frequency domain of mathematical idealism can transform itself to create extended space-time objects and their perception with inverse ontological Fourier mathematics. Okay, so you have here the forward and the inverse Fourier transforms. And so basically, the idea here is that well, let's start with this one. So this set, this f of sigma, so that's a function of frequencies. So this function of frequencies in the unextended frequency mental ideal domain of unextended frequencies, just like photons, right? Photons are immaterial and massless, and they occupy no space and time, right? So they are a domain of frequency. A domain of frequency with no extension. They're a singularity of frequency, right? A singularity which nonetheless contains properties of frequency and phase and other relationships within itself, yeah? So this function of frequencies in the singularity applied to the Fourier transform will create this capital F of x, which is a space-time body, a space-time object, or a space-time signal. Now conversely, a space-time signal will transform to a set of frequencies in the frequency domain. So that is your transceiver concept. Remember a video a ways back we were describing how the brain is a transceiver? So it's both receiving and transmitting. It's receiving frequencies and then transmitting them back. So that's how it works with forward and inverse Fourier transforms. That's how it does it. That's how you connect a singularity, a dimensionless singularity of frequency, a singularity, a frequency domain, to an extended space-time domain. So that solves Descartes' problem of unextended substance and extended substance. How do you connect an unextended substance to the perception of extension? Well, you do that through the Fourier transform. It's quite simple, quite easy. Now, to demonstrate that, how wonderful, right? Therefore, it will likely be a scenario where ontological Fourier mathematics applies. So if we want to find mind at work, behind the scenes in reality, which we should be able to find, you should think, right, under idealism, it should be in a scenario then where ontological Fourier mathematics applies, because OFM is how the mental singularity creates existence, creates our universe. So that's where you should see it. So the thing is, well, how do you probe a scenario like that? Well, ontological Fourier mathematics applies in thermodynamics and quantum mechanics. Those are the two most obvious and well-known areas where ontological Fourier mathematics applies. Okay? So let's devise a thermodynamic light trap. Light is interesting because it is immaterial. It's not made of any mass. That's interesting because that's just like basis existence thought in a circling, right? Light is unextended. It occupies no space or time. Well, that's interesting because that's just like the basis of the idea of the circling occurring in thought, being an unextended concept, right? So it's mathematical. Well, that's just like the circling and basis existence thought. It is a frequency and has a frequency. Well, that's just like the basis circling and existence. And that connects to ontological Fourier mathematics as a series of frequencies, that all frequencies will exist. It has two components, like basis existence, circling, with respect to real and imaginary numbers. So light has a magnetic and an electric component. Well, that's just like the circling with its real and imaginary component. So wow, there's so much that's similar between light and a circling. That's amazing, right? And basis existence. So light has all of the properties of basis mental mathematical existence. Well, that's just neat. That sort of relates to that biblical statement, let there be light, right? So an Abrahamist might be able to recognize that once you describe this to them. So hence, what about a scenario where you trap light in some sort of a thermodynamic and therefore what is an ontological Fourier mathematical interaction with matter? If you trap it, it might have to do something to respond in some way. If it has to do something to respond, that might exhibit agency and might therefore exhibit the mind. right? The will. Now here's an interesting little thought. It might have to become God. So this relates to the Gnostic idea, this little sentence. Just thought I'd throw this in here. That was so fun. So that's the idea that our soul, being made of light, is trapped in our body. And being trapped in our body for billions of years or however long in this universe, what does it have to do to escape? What does our soul have to do to escape being trapped, being linked to this body? It has to become God. That's how it escapes, right? And that's the whole game. And then kind of like this Latin exitus acta probat. You know what that means? It means the end justifies the means, right? So the means is being trapped in matter and being tortured for billions of years. And the result of that is that you become God eventually. You have to go through hell to become God. So the ends justify the means. So what are the means? The means are every possible horrible thing that you can possibly imagine. Basically billions of years of torture. And then you get to become God at the end. Sounds like a good deal. Well, not really. But anyway, that's how it works. Okay, so origin of ontological Fourier mathematics is thermodynamics. Okay, so the problem of this above equation, this partial differential equation, is what Joseph Fourier was facing when he first derived the techniques of the Fourier transform, which is what ontological Fourier mathematics is now. So this is a really interesting equation. So U here actually represents temperature. For some reason they use U. This is just a general term. So basically this equation says that the rate of change of temperature with respect to time is equal to a constant times the rate of acceleration of temperature with respect to space plus, many of you might recognize this, who've been following me for some time, Q, which is heat. Heat as a function of space and time, and then that's just over a couple of constants, thermal capacity and density of the material. Okay, so this is the equation that Joseph Fourier was facing when he first developed the techniques of the Fourier transform. Okay, so the math of the light trap uses this same equation, and its solution can be numerically computed with special techniques to compute this equation numerically over space and time. So the trap should therefore satisfy the requirements of ontological Fourier mathematics. And it does, good. So maybe in a light trap where this equation applies and where we're trapping light in some odd way, maybe we will see something happen with this equation. This is where we should find something. If you just think about it, you just sort of set up where you should, how you should be able to solve this problem of finding mind and existence. Should be here. So let's explore the fake greenness effect, which is the light trap. So the idea of the light trap, these are they're panes of glass, but the lines and their values represent the temperatures that they come to. So there are two things. You can think of them as panes of glass, and then they're going to rise up because it's going to be the temperature that the pane of glass is. So what happens is that you have light come in at a high frequency, it gets absorbed as heat at the bottom layer here. After being absorbed as heat, new energy or other energy gets re-emitted at a much lower frequency, and that lower frequency light gets trapped. Okay, so if it's trapped versus if it's not trapped or it doesn't behave in sort of the trapping sort of modality as is claimed with the greenhouse effect of climate alarmism, we'll see one behavior versus another behavior. Okay, so if the light trapping effect of the greenhouse effect of climate alarmism were true, then you would have this sort of response. So the light is coming in as heat, heats up the bottom layer, and the heat coming in is 91 degrees Celsius worth of heating, comes in, and the bottom layer just goes up, 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 because light is being trapped in that theory, and it gets trapped such that the bottom temperature just keeps on increasing almost up to 800 degrees Celsius. You can see that this top layer, this most exteriormost layer of the light trap is what comes to 91 degrees Celsius, but inside the temperature raises to much, much higher temperatures. The thing about this is that all greenhouses in the world and other people who have done light trapping, in fact, Joseph Fourier did a light trap experiment just like this. And he did not find these results. This is not what's found experimentally. This is what's claimed by climate science, and this is what climate science says carbon dioxide is going to do to the Earth. Having carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going to make the temperature go up, 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 up like that. Might as well just watch it again. So climate science says that carbon dioxide is going to trap light, and therefore it's going to make the temperature go up, 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 up like this. It's just so interesting because carbon is obviously the basis of life, right? And so carbon is basically then what's trapping the light of our soul and matter, right? So you can see some interesting esoteric connection there, right? That's kind of funny. Anyway, this is not what's observed practically in reality. That's not what's observed empirically in an actual greenhouse or in any sort of light trap, okay? What is observed, rather, is this. You have 91 degrees Celsius input. Well, then the only possible temperature that you can get to, if you're heated at 91 degrees Celsius, well, what temperature are you going to get to then? 91 degrees Celsius, right? What other temperature are you going to be? What other arbitrary temperature are you going to be if it's not going to be 91 degrees Celsius that you're being heated at, right? So this is what happens in reality, is that all the panes of glass of the light trap come to the same temperature as the temperature of the input, 91 degrees Celsius. So they rise in this fashion. The bottom one warms up, and then the outer layers start warming up, and then eventually the outer layer is 91 degrees Celsius, and it's emitting all of the energy that comes in. Okay, so the temperatures are all the same. Temperatures are all the same. Now, I wonder at the esoteric correspondence here. Let's just think about, I mean, there's a bunch of tangents here, but in the traditional sort of solar system models, they used circles, right? The Ptolemaic model of the solar system used circles. And why did they use circles for the motion of the planets about the sun, or actually about the Earth at that time? Why do they use circles? Just because circles were considered to be perfect, and they just figured that, you know, the perfection of the celestial sphere would exhibit the perfection of God, the perfection of the circlings, the perfection of the perfect circle. And so they thought that they would be circles, right? Well, and then it turned out in the end that it wasn't circles, it was something else, right? They wanted it to be circles just because it seemed like that should be. They thought that there should be a correspondence between the heavens, right? Between the beautiful, perfect heavens and the way perfect mathematics works, which is a circle, right? It turned out that it was a bit more complicated than that, and the heavens did not exhibit such a simple thing as perfect circles. So possibly there's some sort of an idea going on with this, is that because the theory is that souls being trapped in matter eventually become God in order to escape, then that means that souls are in some way, you know, being increased in energy, increased in power, sort of beyond the power that they come in. So if they come in at 91 degrees Celsius, well, then they increase to such a much higher power, a much higher temperature, that makes them more like God and allows them to have the temperature of whatever power to escape, right? And so maybe that was the idea, that's why they think that the light trap should work like this physically, practically, because it should reflect what is the sort of esoteric conception of why the soul enters into matter. But it's more complicated than that, and this is not what actually happens in physical reality. Temperature does not increase like this. The light trap does not increase temperature of energy. It does not decrease the entropy of energy. That's not what happens. Okay? What happens is this. You simply stay at the temperature that you come in at, right? Okay. So let's look at introduce a change, take away heat. So this is what climate alarm greenhouse effect numbers would have to do when you take away heat. So this thing is going to go up. I'll just fast forward. So it's going up, up, up to its maximum temperature. And then when it gets there, you take away the heat. So I just had in the program that you take away heat in the code for this. In the numerical computation, you take away heat. And what happens? So you take away the heat and you start dropping in temperature. So this drops in temperature really fast. And that's just due to, or this end, I mean, that's just because of the fourth power dependence of emission on temperature, as some of you might be familiar with. So you have the hot end drop really fast and the cool end drop slower. But the thing about this is that it is still qualitatively rational, although it's not what happens in an actual greenhouse, rising up to a temperature like this. The sequence of the math here is still qualitatively rational. The hot part stays hottest, heat flows from the hottest part out to the coolest part, and then flows emits energy, emits out into space from the outer layer, right? And the hot part always remains warmer than the cooler parts, right? And so that's a rational sequence. Although it's not what happens, it's a rational sequence, okay? But what actually happens, if you just use the equations for what actually happens while it's being heated from the previous slide, let's watch what happens when you take away heat here. So this is what actually happens during heating. Now take away the heat. Oh my gosh, that does not look right at all. Those equations are no longer working. Here, it was just the same equations. They didn't change the equations. All they did was take away heat. The equations totally stayed the same, and you got this rational sequence. Here you take away heat, and now the equations are not representing reality as what actually happens. Look, this hot, the inside of the light trap, the very inside of the light trap cools first. That doesn't make any sense because the cooling can only occur from the outside of the light trap. This is the exterior here, emitting to outer space. This has to cool first. This has to drop in temperature first, and once it starts dropping in temperature, then heat can flow from the exterior, or from the interior, sorry, from the inside to the outside down that gradient and flow out. But that's not what happened. But just by using the same equations, what happened is that you got this totally irrational behavior. This does not make sense. You can't explain why it would behave like this qualitatively. That's not the correct behavior. The inside where the heat is being, or the temperature is being most insulated, can't drop in temperature by itself. So that's weird. So you actually have to make a change to the underlying mathematical equation to get this response. So look, here's the initial equation, the most important part, and then when heat is taken away, it has to change to this. See that? The form of the equation changed. The form of the equation is like this. This is for the layer, outer layer. So the form of the equation at the boundaries changes from this to this. Now that produces qualitatively and empirically correct behavior. The exterior cools first, and the interior, being the most highly insulated part, stays highest in temperature, and certainly can't drop first. The exterior has to drop first, right? And the interior has to stay hotter, warmer than the exterior, since the exterior is where cooling takes place. So what had to happen there is that the equations had to change. The underlying equations of the physics had to change. Ontological thermodynamics, ontological Fourier mathematics and thermodynamics, first the wind. For the wind, this is the first detection of mind at the basis of the operations of physics. So the equations had to modify themselves. I had to do that in code. And because I had to do that in code to get what reality actually does, that means that that's what reality is itself doing in order to administrate a rational sequence of events in the fundamental physics. So the equations themselves are changing. On the inside, the equations are doing what we said they should have to do to exhibit mind. They have to be able to autonomously change and adapt themselves to a simple change in the situation. The change was to simply take away heat. That's all you did. Take away heat. And to take away heat, that changed the internal mechanics of the computation of the equation. So that is mind. And if mind is mathematics under the idealist, Illuminist theory, treatise of idealism, right? Then that is demonstrating what you had to demonstrate, right? The autonomy of mind. Mind, something changing, the equations changing to administrate a change in the scenario, right? So the equations aren't dead and static, but we caught them doing something which only life and mind can do, adapting to change. So perhaps it is just that thermodynamics, the origin of ontological Fourier mathematics, is where the mind of existence, or God in Abrahamist terms, has now first been witnessed. Now, probably in quantum mechanics, it's probably all over the place, right? Because quantum mechanics is always all about, observation, collapses of wave function, this and that. They just haven't been able, the scientific materialists just haven't been able to interpret it correctly. They don't know how to interpret quantum mechanics, right? Because they're materialists and they don't, subscribe to any of this sort of mathematical idealism, right? And so it's probably all over the place in quantum mechanics. It's probably been seen many times where they didn't know what they were seeing. And in any case, I've come in and demonstrated it in thermodynamics, which is nice because thermodynamics is where ontological Fourier mathematics originates in the first place. So, perfect. So we set the problem up. We realized what the problem actually was. How do you actually detect the mind of God? Well, you actually have to actually detect changes in equations, changes in the math. Well, you don't do that via the laws of physics. You have to do it via ontological Fourier mathematics under the idealist ontological mathematical theory. And then we did that. Fantastic. First time in history. First time in history. You happy? Do you like what you just saw? First time in history that the mind of existence, the mental mathematical mind of existence, which naturally has to be an omnipotent, fully maximally conscious mind, which, you know, there's nothing else to call that other than what we've always called it, God. Although now I would prefer using the, you know, the mind of existence, or one, or I would even call it source, although that's a different topic, which maybe I'll get into some other time. In any case, we've witnessed now, we have found a scenario where the mind of existence has to expose itself in order to administrate a rational sequence of events in our universe, in reality. Pretty cool, huh? So, does it matter, Tamer? Okay, so this is kind of a silly side. I just thought, what would an Abrahamist say to me that would piss me off and make me mad, right? So an Abrahamist might say, so through some cockamamie argument, you proved what we already feel to be true. Okay, sure, yeah, okay. But, you know, without us doing this kind of work, without scientists and rationalists doing science and mathematics, you know, you would just be sitting in a cave with your feelings forever. You wouldn't have running water, you wouldn't have technology, you wouldn't have anything, right? Okay, so I mean, just don't be so dismissive of it, right? And in fact, I don't think they would be dismissive. I think that they would actually accept it. I don't think maybe some people would just want to be rude about it, but I think anyone who's being respectful would actually say, okay, well, wow, you've just demonstrated God. But the thing is, it's not actually demonstrating Abrahamism specifically, is it? Right? It's not actually equating to the tenets of Abrahamism or any other religion, deist religion, necessarily at all. Right? In fact, what we've demonstrated is Illuminism. That's what we've demonstrated. That's what I've just demonstrated through this exercise. We've demonstrated ontological mathematics, ontological Fourier mathematics. We've demonstrated Illuminism, classical Illuminism. We've demonstrated the truth of everything that Mike Hockney has ever written. That's what we demonstrated. The religion is Illuminism. So Abrahamists, if you followed this and you appreciate what we found, but of course the point is, you know, Abrahamism is a lot more, like generally Christianity. It's not just about the philosophy of why you should believe in God. That's actually the least part of it. It's, you know, it's all this other stuff, lifestyle, culture, community, you know, getting together, you know, it's all, and Illuminism really doesn't do that. Illuminism really just covers the philosophical aspect of it. As far as, you know, Abrahamism, they have churches all over the world, you know, multi-billion-dollar religious organizations. They have communities, and that's not something that Illuminism does or has at all. Maybe we should do that. That was kind of what I was hinting at previously in previous videos about what you can do to contribute. It would be nice to have a group. You know, it would be nice to have a church for us to go to and meet and hang out and do social events and do things good for the community. I don't know. Shouldn't you do those things? We're here on this earth. What are we supposed to do? Just sit here and think about, oh, wow, we understand existence now. I mean, aren't we supposed to interact with each other? I mean, at least the Abrahamists have interaction with each other. What do we have? Mostly online, and we're all just fighting and hate each other. And then, you know, you have these psychos trying to take over and all this stuff. We could comment on that in the future. Maybe I'll comment on that in the future. So New Ager, Love and Lightist, I know what they understood, what they care. What science? So here's what science says. Here's what scientists would say after this demonstration. Math is meaningless. We're all meaningless. It doesn't matter what you've shown. Doesn't matter what you think you've shown. It's all meaningless. You're meaningless. I'm meaningless. Everything. What I mean here, not clear at science. It's not clear why scientists are actually scientists, I've realized. As I was making this, I realized it's not clear why scientists are scientists. It's not clear. They just seem to be nihilists. They just seem to want to hate human existence and make human existence meaningless. In fact, I do know the answer as to why scientists behave this way. I do know why they are that way. The answer is in my book, Planet Wars, if you'd like to read it. Eventually, I will do a video on it and explain why scientists are actually like that. The answer is that they're not actually people. Rationalist, Illuminists, well, now that we understand the mind of God and we've demonstrated the mind of God, well, let's be gods now. We can have a Star Trek, Star Wars, and far beyond that, future where we're going to be able to control, basically, it's going to be far more than, it'll be more like Star Wars where we have, you know, Jedi and mental control, mental powers over reality, but I'm sure it's going to be much, much more fantastic, the places that we can go with this. Problem is, how do we get there? And let's get there. So just ending with a couple memes. So here's your nihilist IFLS science subscriber. Looking at the night sky makes me realize how puny and insignificant I am on the cosmic scale. So that's typically the, you know, what you get out of scientific materialism. And here's who's this futuristic Chad, I guess. To see the universe is to be blown away by its majesty, to feel small and helpless. But then I realize that I have a gift from the Creator that not even the brightest star has, to look upon the universe and marvel in its beauty. So of course that gift is consciousness, self-awareness, right? I kind of like this slide a little bit better. It makes the point more succinctly and more quickly. So you have the same crying guy, yeah, the IFLS science subscriber, looking at the night sky. Makes me realize how puny and insignificant I am on the cosmic scale. But Chad says, I am the result of 14 billion years of cosmic evolution. I am a thermodynamic miracle. That's apropos, a thermodynamic miracle. I am the waking universe looking back at itself. So of course, this is, you know, the Illuminist, deist sort of approach, and this is the scientific materialist, right? The universe has nothing to do, to the scientist, to the scientific materialist, the universe has nothing to do with you, and in fact, you're pretty much totally disconnected from the universe, and you're totally irrelevant. And this guy, Chad, says, well, all that might be true, but in the end, I am a thermodynamic miracle, and it's amazing that I am here. I am the universe. In the end, I am the universe looking back at itself. As I said in that previous video, we are existence. Existence is us. We're not separate from existence. Existence is not something else out there. It is through us and about us. There's no boundary between ourselves and existence. We are those stars that we look at. We are those galaxies we look at with our telescopes. We are them looking at itself. Right? We are stardust. We are the product of the evolution of stars looking back upon itself and what it has done, you know, in the universe. So how wonderful is that? All right, so did that make the point? Did that, I mean, that went in a lot of different places. It's relevant, I suppose, as talked to anyone, but you could sort of adapt that to Abrahamists. Perhaps you could adapt Abrahamists to Illuminists. I think that Abrahamists would accept a lot of this argument. The only thing is that they would probably want to retain their, you know, their slave sort of morality, their slave consciousness, I suppose. That's going to be the hardest thing to get around. Maybe it's not relevant. Like I said, maybe who cares? Let's just move on. The people who can understand it, the people who like it. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Take care. Bye-bye.